Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are taking a look at air observers. We're starting off a very quick series looking at the two observers that we currently have in Bolt Action 3rd Edition. And as we continue in the Good, Bad, Murky series, we have our first murky one. I confess I waited for quite a while to do anything about this one because I wanted a few more data points on how they were going to treat air observers with the new books as they're coming out. And now that we've seen the new Army special rules for the Soviet Union, I feel like now is not a horrible time to do the Air Observer video, because I don't think we're going to see too many big things. Of course, we saw the continuation of the traditional American one tied to 2 airstrikes instead of the 1. Now we have a new one tied to it. We have a rough idea on the kinds of changes and adjustments we might expect to see. And it means air observers are interesting. And for the purpose of this series, I'm not going to say that they're good because there are some very easy, simple, hard counters that can make air observers non-factors on the battlefield, if not an extreme waste of points. There are also some factors that could make it so that it could be the MVP of your game. And so I think the right answer on this one is that it counts as a murky choice. It can be good. It can be horrific, and there's no real way to know, okay? Until we actually get into way more about the Army list, about the scenario, about, the deployment styles, all kinds of stuff. We can't actually know anything until we settle all of that out. And that is, I'm not gonna lie, not an area that I like to live when it comes to units. So we're gonna take a look at what the abilities are for this unit. And for all of you who have read through the rules for air observers, it's not going to surprise you. This first section is going to be a longer one than normal because it takes up 2 pages, 2 whole pages, plus potentially, depending on how you count it, another part of another page to discuss how these things work, which makes it one of the most complicated units in the game, up there with the artillery observer, which we're going to talk about next week. We're then going to continue by looking at things like opportunity cost, pin generation, damage, etc. Like we normally do. We'll talk about objective holding and objective taking, which is actually really interesting with this one. And then we'll talk about target prioritization and the changes that I would make, which I'm not going to lie, are probably the most dramatic recommended changes that I have recommended for anything in Bolt Action. I am, in general, I was a pretty big fan for most things in 2nd edition. I had my quibbles and gripes here and there. In general, I'm a fan about 3rd edition. I have some quibbles and gripes over here. One of the quibbles and gripes that I still maintain from both of those is the Air Observer. Okay, so let's talk about it. First of all, when we're looking at special rules and abilities, first of all, yeehaw, there's 2 pages. There you go. There's the 2 pages on these. It doesn't include the actual profile, any special rules, any of the, weapon profiles that are involved when the strike actually comes in. This is just the text for what air observers do. Okay? And so, yeah, you can pause at any point during this video and take a look at these, and you will have the exact text for how air observers work. Okay? In 2nd edition, it worked out actually mostly the way that it did here in 3rd edition, right? You would call in 1 strike, you use a fire order in order to call in a strike, you nominate a unit. So this is different from the way that the artillery observer works. It's not a point, it's a unit, okay, that you nominate. So if that unit moves, the unit is still nominated. Okay, and that's an important part behind how all of this works. Okay, and they had the ability in 2nd edition to forward deploy. They were observers, so you could move them out similar to how a spotter or a sniper did, which in 3rd edition, we now have this rule, infiltrator, right? Which kind of takes that place, right? It fulfills the same role, though it also comes with some new benefits. So in 3rd edition, you still call in 1 strike per game, 2 if you're the United States, just like in 2nd, okay? You still call it in on fire order. Now they can also spot for indirect fire units, so they kind of double as a spotter for an indirect fire unit. They have the infiltrator keyword, which not only means they can forward deploy, it also means that as long as they're not declaring a run or an advance order, which would include the turn they declare that fire order for calling in the strike, they get a +1 to their cover save. So if you have them hanging out in a ruin, which is kind of the ideal spot for somebody like this, you'd get a 4+ cover save for being in the ruin, becomes a 3+ cover save with infiltrator, which means, you can't get better than a 2+. You're technically wasting stuff if you end up going down in future turns, but that's probably a better place to be than not having, the not having the benefits of a 2+ cover save. It also means that if you're in a position where you don't really want to go down because maybe you want to take a fire order, maybe you took this as a larger unit, more on that later when we talk about objective holding and objective taking, you have some ability to be able to at least have that 3+ save, which is better than normal, without having to go down, right? So like all of that is positive and all of that is great. They also got an awful lot better in third edition because the rookie pilot result on the airstrike table got better. So instead of just your opponent gets to choose a different unit, full stop, could be one of yours, which is overwhelmingly what people did for obvious reasons, even if it was just to call it on the air observer itself. Now at least the friendly unit of yours that they need to call it on, the change they make has to be within 12 inches of the original target. So if you stay a good bit back by the time you've called in that airstrike, you don't have to worry about it hitting you, which is nice. You also don't really have to worry per se about it hitting a unit you don't like because you could just choose a unit that is like right on its own. Admittedly, it means that, you might end up with just a flyby, so it just takes D3 pins instead. But you're not worried about like, okay, I'm going to drop it on this really, really big, infantry squad because I really want to mess up this infantry squad. And then they drop it, 9 inches away on a light mortar team. And you're like, well, shoot, I just spent like close to, if not over 100 points on wiping out a light mortar team. Hooray for me, right? Like, so, there's stuff there. That I think is helpful. It is, I think, definitely better than it used to be, and it makes air observers a lot more likely to take. I think the first problem, though, when it comes to looking at special rules and special abilities is just the sheer volume of text. Take a look at that. That is 2 full pages with a picture, admittedly, at the bottom, but that also doesn't include any of the stuff you need to know about how howitzers work, which appear later in the thing. It doesn't include any of the discussion on cover saves, which you might need to go to later if you're newer to the game and don't know how those things work. So, like, there is quite a bit that goes into this, okay? And this is the most text for a special rule or unit in the game. The second closest is the artillery observer. Okay, so suffice it to say, to start off with, special rules and abilities are interesting. They are unique, but there is a lot of them. So how does this work properly? We're going to walk through it with multiple slides because that's how much content we have here. Okay, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to choose a unit that is within line of sight of the air observer. Okay, so you can't just choose any unit on the board. You are drawing line of sight from the observer. You don't have an observation plane up in the sky to help you out. And of course, this is before we're getting, live feed stuff from satellites and stuff. Okay, you have to use a fire order in order to do this. So again, you cannot call this as part of a down order or something like that. So you are opening yourself up to attack on the first turn when you're calling this thing in. And there are a few situations where you may not want to call this in on the first turn. In most cases, you're probably going to want it in on turn 1. It all just depends on, based on when you deployed this, like, what's available in your spot. Did people use Rangers Lead the Way to move things out of your line of sight? Like, there's just a lot of questions, okay, that result in this. But starting of the following turn, so, before turn 2 actually begins or whatever turn comes after the turn where you declare this order, before the order dice are drawn, so before anything else happens, you roll a d6. And using the chart that's over there on the right-hand side, you determine what happens. So on a 4 through 4, 5, or 6, the strike is going to come in, and that moves us and progresses us on to the rest of the chart. On a 2 or 3, the skies are empty. The planes are busy, nothing's happening, and so because of that, you basically don't do anything for this turn. The observer can continue to act normally, do whatever it wants, and then at the beginning of the next turn, you would roll again on this chart just like you did here. Okay, so basically you just repeat step 1 again until you get past step 1. Then on a 1 result, you end up with a rookie pilot. This is where the airman might be a little bit confused. He was called in to strike a target at this specific location, and he hits a different one. Okay, this could be another enemy target. It could be one of your targets. Your opponent gets to choose, and they just have to choose somebody within 12 inches of the original target. If you're going after a solo unit that is not surrounded by anybody else, then instead of striking the target, it just does a flyby to scare them, doing D3 pins, and then you're done. You are finished resolving the aircraft. So your 1 strike for the overwhelming number of nations that we have, currently it's just the US that gets more than 1, could be you pay 75 plus points for D3 pins on a unit eventually, right? Because there's no guarantee that you're going to roll that 1 first. You could roll a 2 and then a 3 and then a 2 and then a 3 and then a 1, and you're at the beginning of turn 6 and you did D3 pins the entire game, right? So like, this is part of what makes the air observer so murky for me is it's difficult to determine how effective this thing actually is because of how this chart works. I think this part is fine. I do think it could be tightened. You'll see that when we get down further in the changes that I'd recommend. But this part, I mean, is mostly good because it's relatively easy to work out, right? One chart is not necessarily bad. Then comes step 2, okay? At this point, we're going to back up. We've rolled to see whether the plane is coming in. We can hear the sounds, right? And then the opponent gets a chance. Well, actually, then you get to place a suitable token 18 inches away from the intended target to represent where the aircraft starts opening fire and begins to deploy its payload, okay? This is going to start freaking out units that are underneath of it, okay? And so that's what the purpose of this is. And then, of course, you'll also have the part where they fire. But before we resolve any of that for what's going on with the plane, the next thing we have to do is we have to resolve flak. So not every unit, of course, has flak. This is primarily autocannon units, typically in open top chassis if it's on a vehicle or as part of an artillery platoon. Or they are in the form of pintle-mounted machine guns. Those could be on vehicles. Those could be machine gun teams as part of a heavy weapons team. It could be, in a few cases, you'll see machine guns on artillery pieces. So, like, there's an American, M51 gun carriage, which has 4 heavy machine guns on it and it has the flak rule. And so if they have the flak rule, I'm guessing as long as they didn't hold over down from last turn, but that isn't even technically mentioned in the rules. It just says pintle-mounted machine guns have the flak special rule. Note that firing a flak weapon does not make the vehicle count as open top for the turn. It's assumed that they button up after the thing is gone. There's nothing saying if you carried over a down order from last turn that you don't get to participate in flak. Okay? Realize that that's a thing. We're going to talk about that later too, okay? But then what happens is as long as it's in the arc, because some of these weapons are fixed, and so if you have a fixed pintle-mounted machine gun, for example, then if it's outside of the arc, the 45 degrees to either side of the barrel, they wouldn't get to fire. But overwhelmingly, especially in the artillery section, a lot of those autocannons especially are 360 degrees, which means they will get a chance to fire no matter what. And everything with flak gets a chance to fire, which means even your own flak gets a chance to fire. Now, they have a chance to be able to notice and see that they are, in fact, yours, and thus shouldn't be firing at it. And so you'll see that there's an area at the top of the second column tied to this where you get to roll a d6 for each of these flak units, and they will hold their fire on a 4+ if they're inexperienced, 3+ if they're regular, 2+ if they're veteran. This is a change, by the way, from last edition, and it is a very nice change because it means if you're taking them regular or veteran, which is overwhelmingly how you would take these kinds of units, unless you're taking an inexperienced machine gun team with a pintle mount for like 40 points. So if you're spamming out machine guns, 50-50 chance they're going to try to drive off your own aircraft. Okay. I think in those situations, I just wouldn't take an air observer with those units, and I would just take 2 of those for the same cost as 1 air observer unit and just pray that they're going to do pins for you. And if you're doing something like, say, Germany with inexperienced machine gun teams, 7 shots, even with the -1 to hit, you're probably going to do some pins. You're probably going to be just fine, okay, in terms of doing that. But in general, if you're going to run inexperienced machine guns with the pintle mount, I just wouldn't run an air observer. If you are going to run machine gun teams with the pintle mount as your own flak protection and you are going to run an air observer, may I recommend take them regular or veteran, because then you can at least pretty reliably, bad days happen, it's just a fact, but you can pretty reliably keep them from firing on your own units, okay? What's happening is that they're going to be looking for a 5+ to hit with all of the attacks that they have. So autocannons are going to be firing 2 shots. Machine guns are going to be firing 6 to 7 shots. And even if they're vehicle mounted where normally shots would be half, they're going to be firing with their whole volume. So this is the one time where vehicle mounted weaponry actually does get their full armament as regards machine guns, okay? And what happens is that you're looking for a 5+. And so those, if they have absolutely no pins on them, and effectively the pin modifier to the normal shots ends up applying. So 6+ to hit if they're pinned, 5+ to hit if they're not pinned, okay? And then from there, once you see what hits, if they have a high explosive profile, so autocannons is overwhelmingly where this occurs, although you do have some of those like super heavy AT guns like the Flak 88, for example, for Germany, that also have a high explosive caliber. And so you would resolve the number of hits that they cause against the plane as if you were firing at a building. So in this case, a light autocannon, which is overwhelmingly the most common, does D3 hits. Same for a heavy autocannon. Super heavy autocannon does 2d6 hits, which is a lot. Okay. And then if you can tally up the total hits, however many you have, and it counts as 3 or more, or in one specific scenario for the Soviet Union, if they get the right vehicle on the vehicle chart, as we'll soon see, then they're driven off on 5 hits. But in general, you just need 3 in order to drive off the vehicle. And then the aircraft is going to turn around. It's going to see too much danger, or maybe it even got shot down. Who knows? But in any event, the attack doesn't happen. Okay. Which means we've set up, we've rolled to see whether the attack comes in. We've set up where the locations are that it's coming in, and that makes sense. And then we kind of take a step back to see, okay, now does it come in actually at all? And after we're done taking that step back, then we're going to step forward again. Okay. After this happens, we go basically back up to that top section over here. After it says if the warplane is stopped by flak fire, the warplane model is removed and the airstrike is over. If it is not stopped, then this is where we pick back up. The target unit and every unit from either side within 6 inches of the target unit and within 6 inches of the center of the warplane is potentially pinned. You roll a d3 for each of these units and add the number. Now, they say potentially pinned, but the result is they will actually be pinned because there's no result of a 0, okay, on this. It's not like a preparatory bombardment from 2nd edition or in the optional narrative rules for 3rd edition, okay? So they will receive something, okay? So this is within 6 inches of the token, right? So this is the thing that we placed 18 inches away from the target. Okay, so we're going to catch all of those units that are within 6 inches. We're going to apply D3 pins to each of them. You're rolling individually for each of them. Okay, so it's not like you can roll once and then apply that number of pins to all of the units that are within range. Okay, and then once you've done that, then we're going to start step 3, which is we're going to figure out what kind of plane is coming in. This is where part of the problem comes in with the Soviet Union rule, and we'll talk about this next. On step 3, we're now going to roll for our aircraft, and basically there's 3 results that you can get for everybody. It's just that some of them are more likely to happen than others, okay? On a 1 or a 2, you get a strafing fighter, which is basically just a fighter plane firing. I'm guessing it's a 20mm cannon, because some of them did have 20mm cannons, and so you're doing 2d6 hits with a pen plus 2. Down basically works normally. It can also have the hits as well, which typically is reserved for high explosive damage. This is not high explosive damage, but it does technically also have the number of hits that are taken while also increasing your cover save. It does specify the only saves that apply are things like if you're in an actual area of terrain, or if the terrain would kind of be between the unit and the aircraft. So if you have a unit that's hiding behind a forest to avoid being in line of sight, or behind a building in order to be behind line of sight, but the plane, based on where, the unit that you targeted, and then also where you swing that token around to, and this is why the token placement matters so much. If it's all happening behind that building or behind that forest and the building don't help you, right? It's not going to keep you safe. It's not going to prevent anything. So it does kind of encourage units to actually hop into terrain, making them shootable by other units, as opposed to having to work out, oh, well, now you can't see me. You got to work all the way around this. An air observer can be one way of kind of flushing people into terrain, ironically, whereas high explosive stuff is generally used to flush people out of terrain. This one's designed to kind of push them into it, which makes it a little easier for the rest of your units. A useful feature. But when this comes through, you then work out your cover saves and you resolve the attacks. And of course, targets that are armored, targets are hit from the top. Okay, doesn't do anything to soft skin vehicles, because again, it's only armored units, so damage value 7 and above. So it's not just all vehicles getting a benefit of pen plus 1 to the top, but it does mean that even that pen plus 2 will actually be pen plus 3 as long as you're attacking an armored unit. Okay, you're then going to resolve the damage against the target unit based on what the target type is. A fighter bomber is not doing this 2d6 hits with pen plus 2. It's resolving as a medium howitzer. So this is a 3-inch high explosive damage template. Starts at pen plus 3 because it's 3 inches. And then it goes up pen plus 1 because it's against top armor, so that is pen plus 4. This does ignore all of the cover because this is an attack coming from the top, and thus it counts as indirect fire. You'll see there it says, the equivalent of an indirect fire hit. So there's no cover save. Down will still have the number of hits taken, but any wound that's done is a wound, okay? When done against an infantry unit, and obviously, an actual damage result is then resolved on the damage chart against a vehicle. Okay. And then on a 5 or a 6, you get a ground attack aircraft. And this is, again, an indirect fire hit, so no cover, resolved by a heavy howitzer, so pen +4. It's a 4-inch wide template, and down will have the number of hits, but again, there's no save going against it, and pen +1 against the top. So this is pen +5 against armor. Now, this part is easy to resolve, right? Because you just roll a d6, look up whatever it is, resolve the hit, roll a second time for whatever the hit is, for whatever that damage roll would be, and then move on. The problem that I have is a couple things. First of all, it adds an extra roll that, in my mind, really isn't necessary, which is, what kind of plane is this? And you'll see that in my recommended changes down below. It's adding an extra thing that makes it really swingy. And so the question of your value is not going to be particularly great. It also kind of forces everything toward the middle in terms of what you actually shoot at, because you're more likely to just begin targeting big infantry sections and very, very light armor, because you don't know whether you're going to have a pen +2, possibly pen +3, or whether you're going to get a pen +4, possibly a pen +5, right? So going after somebody's really, really big armor, damage value 10, for example, you could be a complete non-factor if it comes in as a strafing fighter, because you can't actually do damage even against the top against such a vehicle, right? So you're going to start moving more toward the center. And obviously, even on damage value 9, you're only glancing on a 6. So as you're going to see from the damage chart, things start moving toward the center. And while you could say, well, we're going to go after regular and inexperienced infantry sections as well, or team weapons, like, yes, you can. The problem, of course, is, one, what happens if you roll a 1 to wound? Because that's still a fail. And 2, and more than that, okay, how many points did you spend on this air observer to try to wipe out that one unit? Because remember, it's not like every unit within 6 inches of the token and then every unit within 6 inches of the target is being hit by this. This isn't a multiple rocket launcher. It's just the only unit you're doing damage to, even after you place the token. Token's just for deploying pins. The only unit you're actually doing damage to is the target unit. Okay, so the number of choices you actually have for an air observer start going down in terms of what actually makes sense, because of how this is resolved, because of the fact that it's swinging and we don't really know what we have. The second problem that we get with this is the fact that the Soviet Union has a better chance of getting one of their aircraft. Instead of an even 2-2-2, it's like 2-1-3, which is really nice. Except, technically, we've already rolled for flak. Because the big benefit that their attack aircraft gets is that when you roll for this specialized aircraft or flying fortress, you need 5 hits in order to drive this thing off instead of 3 hits. But the problem is, technically speaking, by the way that this is worded in the book, you don't roll to see what kind of aircraft you get until after we've already rolled for flak. So for the Soviet Union, apparently, we actually have to break. Step 2 actually has a step 2.5, where before we roll for flak, after we've resolved the token, before we roll for flak, we need to jump ahead to step 3, roll for the kind of aircraft, jump back to step 2.5, roll for flak, and then, if we haven't driven it off, come back to here, skip over this step effectively, and start resolving the aircraft. So suffice it to say, it's a mess, okay? Because there's so much text going on, and because little tiny changes, which make total sense and are really cool. And I'm glad that there's, flying fortressy style stuff going around, because I think it's kind of awesome. Yeah, give some nations some interesting stuff to do with air observers. I love that. The problem is that because of how the steps are laid out and how the design concepts behind this are made, it can make it really murky, and I'm not a big fan of that. So, having walked through the special rules, opportunity cost, is it worth it? If you haven't figured out yet, in my mind, this is an extremely expensive asset. That doesn't mean that it's bad. There are some nations, especially minor nations, where I think it could be really advantageous to run an air observer. However, the minimum investment you're making is 75 points. The maximum you're doing could be more than 155 points. For most nations right now, they're limited to 3 men in the unit, but I mean, we've seen 5, 6, 8 men in an observer unit. So you can make these really, really big. And due to the fact that they can take subtypes within your army, so you can make them, stubborn or fanatic or something like that, like, there are a lot of other ways to add more points onto this thing. This thing could be a 200-point behemoth for you if you wanted it to be, right? This could be the center of a Death Star. You really better hit with those aircraft if you're going to make that your Death Star unit, okay? But you could do it. And the reason why, in my mind, this makes the opportunity cost hard to justify in the current edition is because of the fact that you're passing up on one or more armored vehicles in order to take this, depending on what kind of armored vehicles you're running. If you're running battle snails for France, you're passing up on 2 to 3 of them. And if they get larger squads of 5, 6, or more men, an entire armored platoon of Renault FT-17s just to take this one shot, probably, because they're probably going to get a bonus to their artillery observer, not an air observer in their book. That's not very good, right? You will actually do more for your army, including pin generation, possibly even removal, depending on what you're shooting at, with those Renault FT tank, tiny snail tanks, than you will with this unit. So in my mind, it's pretty expensive for what you're getting. I would potentially linger on making them a little bit cheaper. Okay. There are good changes from second edition. I just want to make that really clear. I think it does make the Air Observer a lot more playable and a lot less likely to hurt yourself, which is really nice. The problem is that accompanying this, because of the fact that they made the Air Observer better, they also dramatically reduced the cost of anti-aircraft guns as well as transports with pintle-mounted machine guns, which means, while yes, they are easier for you to use, they stayed at the same cost point, and it is very easy now to drive these things off, even if you're a Soviet that requires 5 hits to drive you off. It's not very expensive. And so on the one hand, I do applaud the changes. I think they were very good changes, relatively subtle and easy changes, which are the kinds of changes I like when making an edition change from one to the next, because people mostly know how they work, and then they see one little change and they're like, oh yeah, brilliant, that's great. The problem is that when you accompany that with other changes elsewhere to compensate for it as well, you're still pushing it down again, right, in terms of its utility and veracity. But that's the thing too, right? Like, what if you face an army that decided, I don't want stationary weaponry, so I'm not going to bring an artillery platoon. So they don't have a lot of 360-degree flak. And then they decided, well, I want those machine gun tanks, and the machine gun tanks don't generally have flak options on them unless they're paying for yet another pintle-mounted machine gun on top, which people don't tend to do for a lot of reasons, which totally makes sense. And so because of that, like, you might run into an army that has no flak. And thus, the changes from second edition are fantastic going into third, and there's no commensurate problem for you in that specific match. So it could be really good. It could win you the game. Loading up on 2, 3, or even 4 of these by having like 2 rifle platoons and then 2 recce platoons, right, or whatever, could be really good. Maybe, depending on what kind of army you face, right? And this is where the swinginess comes in again, right? You know, did they take flak at all? Who knows? There's a very good chance that they do nothing. There's a very good chance they do a lot, depending on, did they bring flak units? Did they bring snipers? And did the sniper get the first order dice on the first turn? And because he also forward deploys, he waited and he deployed some spotters or whatever first. You deploy your air observer, and then he deploys his sniper so he can be beyond 12 of you, but within 36 and with line of sight. First dice, first turn, he assigns it to the sniper. Sniper takes a fire order on 3s, hits, gets a +1 to wound. He's wounding on 3s or 4s, ignoring all cover saves, including that nice infiltrator bonus that we talked about earlier. If he pops that one guy, congratulations, you now have an infantry squad, possibly with submachine guns. It doesn't call in a single strike. And now all the points you paid for the strike, which is around 40 to 50 points, by the way, just so we're clear on how that all works out, it's a lot of points. Now you don't get that, right? So I'm on the fence as to how effective this is. Yeah. It could be really great, or it could be really bad. Who knows? Who can know? Okay. It's just really swingy game design, and I'm not a fan of big swingy game design. I personally prefer simple, that is reliable, so that when somebody decides they want to field something, they can count a little bit on what that unit can probably do. So in my mind, I do appreciate how narrative and thematic and interesting this thing can be. From experience, it can take forever to resolve this thing, and I don't like that. It really breaks the action in ways that I'm not a fan of personally when it comes to game design. In terms of pin generation, we had the exact same story. They could do no pins, because it could be driven off and never arrive. It could do no pins because it does arrive, but then the flak units make it run away. And then it could do like 1 pin because it has to do a flyby past a unit and it only rolls 1d3, or the enemy is really, really spread out. Maybe they don't even have a lot of order dice. And so when you call in the strike, where you place the token, you're not able to catch more than 1 or 2 units, and then you roll a d3 and you only get 1 or 2. But then again, you could have a lot of units clustered in an area, 5 or 6, that are near the token, and you end up doing like 10 pins over there. You do like another 2 on the target unit that you're shooting at, right? Or something like that. And you end up doing like 12 pins. And that was possible in second edition, even without playing Americans. And so your cost could vary widely. And the same thing is true in third edition. You're actually more likely, though, to get large numbers of pins because we've got more officers running around. We have more small teams running around. So the chances people can really spread out is actually quite a bit lower. And so, because the board, of course, did not change in size to be commensurate with the change in the number of order dice that people are fielding at certain levels. So the result is that, I mean, you could get anywhere from 0 because you got driven off to 16 pins per game. And there's no way really to know, right? Because that depends on board design. It depends on when it got called in, how many units have been removed since then. Did it get driven off? There's too many things to factor for. So the result is it could be a really good pin generator, or it could be a really lousy pin generator. And there's no way really to know. And in my mind, that's not very good. Okay. When looking at damage, you can also see this, again, the whole moving toward the center thing, where damage value 10 and 11 sometimes can't even be damaged by this thing at all. So again, you're probably not likely to do stuff there. And even with the Pen +4, the heavy howitzer, if you get the biggest aircraft coming in and dropping the biggest payload on things, even with that, your chances are below 10% that you're actually going to do damage to that thing, right? The glancing hit maybe, but you're not actually going to do serious damage to the thing. And in my mind, if I'm paying 75 plus points to try to do a glancing hit to a big vehicle, I think I'd rather pay that 75 points to buy a medium anti-tank gun that can do glancing damage to that vehicle every turn for multiple turns, right? And that's kind of the way that I tend to think about things. When you start getting to damage value 9, it is slightly better, but not particularly great. And then we see a jump when it comes to damage value 8. And the reason why is because there's a reasonable chance that you're actually going to get a damage result against this vehicle. So DV7 and DV8 is very common, and you'll notice over there on the Pen +2 side, the strafing fighter, even though it has the lowest penetration and thus it has the least number of targets it could go after, the numbers start to explode in terms of the likelihood that you're going to actually do a wound. And the reason why it starts to explode is because you're rolling 2d6 hits, whereas the other two chart on this chart are only doing 1 hit. So that 1 dice might hit or it might not. But when you're rolling 2d6 on average, that's a 3 and a 4. That's 7 hits. And hence why we have the 7 Pen +2 over there. And that means even if the chance to do damage is only around 8%, 8% times 7, because each dice that you're rolling has about an 8% chance of doing damage here, is going to do damage, right? It's way more likely because of the fact that you get 7 tries at it, right? Whereas the others only get 1. And so sure enough, with damage value 7, since you're hitting against that top armor, and so each of them is only looking for a 50% chance of doing actual damage against, glancing or more, but still pretty solid, right? In terms of options, you have about over 100% chance that you're going to get to roll at least 1 damage result. You might get more than 1. You might get exactly 1. But if you're rolling 7 dice and you're looking for even just 1 6, your chances are pretty reasonable, right? When you get to damage value 6, it gets even higher. Damage value 5 is larger, though. Keep in mind that damage values 5s, 4s, and 3s, as long as it isn't a tow. And newsflash, if you're being called in on a tow, you're going to waste your points. It's just the way it is. But if you're calling in on any of those other ones, if that infantry squad goes down, if the artillery squad goes down, take whatever numbers you have here and have them, because the number of hits that you got is halved. And then, of course, all of these numbers are factored in before you factor in cover saves, because we don't know whether the unit's in cover or not. Of course, for Pen +3 and Pen +4, the two on the right-hand side, you're not going to get any because this is indirect fire, right? So there is no cover save. But the result is, with the down order potential, even then, a strafing fighter is likely to still do at least 1 wound. You have over a 100% chance of doing at least 1 wound to a target. And that is pretty sweet, actually. And so, on the whole, I'm a fan. From a damage potential, if you call in the plane because you didn't get sniped, and if you successfully get it to arrive, and if you are not driven off, and so you actually get to resolve, and if you get the strafing fighter, your damage potential is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. If you get anything else, it's fine. It's not bad. And you are pretty likely to do some damage somewhere. But in general, it's really swingy. And so in my mind, damage potential is fine when it works. So when we look at objective holding, what are we looking at? We're looking at anywhere from 1 to 3, but could be as high as 5, 6, 8 men in cover with infiltrator with regular or veteran. That's fantastic. Okay. If you need to just hold an objective, especially a central objective, this is actually a really good unit to use. Because of the fact that you can call in that airstrike, it also means that if you see a unit that's coming close to you, but isn't within 12 inches of you, important part we need to remember about this, you could choose to just call in a strike on one of those units because you're like, okay, that's a big infantry section. They are pretty likely to try to drive me off of this objective. They're hiding right now over in that rough terrain. They're hiding in that ruin, but they're going to get ready to come out and try to take me off of this objective within the next turn or two. This could be a really, really good choice for you, right? Be careful choosing a transport that might be coming toward your objective, because if they advance the transport, remember that you don't get to resolve the strike immediately. You resolve it at before the beginning of the next turn, and it doesn't strike a point. It strikes a unit. So if you target the transport, and then the transport advances 24 inches up and then starts deploying its payload of guys, it could deploy very, very close to you. And then when we see whether or not it comes in and there's a strafing fighter or whatever that's called in, but it's a rookie pilot, it could end up hitting you as the observer instead of hitting the transport. And depending on how close they came to you, because it can be anywhere within 12 inches, if you aren't even within 6 inches of wherever that token is, then there's a chance you won't even put pins on the original target transport or the unit that it had in it, right? Like there's just a lot of stuff that could go wrong. So be careful. Okay. That's I guess what I'm trying to say. Transports are really difficult to work with because of the fact they can maneuver an awful lot. So what you thought was a safe distance away from your troops could turn out to be not so safe. So be careful. Okay. But suffice it to say, if you can get off the airstrike when you want to, and if you're able to bring it in on a unit, that could be a pretty nice way of at least slowing down their advance, because at least it puts some pins on them, right? Even if you completely botch up the damage roll, or even if you call it in on another unit that you're pretty sure is going to stay still, like say an enemy sniper team or something like that, where they really don't want to be running around, as long as you can place that token, you have to place it 18 inches away. As long as you place that token, so that way it will be overlapping and providing that 6-inch radius to people who will then take pins. That could be really powerful, right? Because then at least you can slow down units that are trying to come after you. They have to try to pass order tests, and maybe they fail. And that could be really advantageous. So how are they? They're fine in terms of slowing things down. They can also react to assaults. If you are going to try to use them to react to assaults and try to defend themselves and holding an objective, don't take pistols. I know it makes them cheaper, but the rifle and the submachine gun is going to be way better. And of course, the drawbacks tied to this are the fact that in general, it is a lot of points to pay for a relatively small squad. Even if you take it more than 1 to 3 men, it is still a lot of points to pay for what you're getting. This is one of those sniper bait style units. There is a very good reason if somebody takes a sniper, first turn, first draw, go after this guy, because they will save themselves a lot of headache by removing this. And every sniper team in the game, even if you just take it as a one-man regular unit, the cheapest you can go, is going to make back its points just by removing this unit, right? And in some cases, you get like a 40-point regular marksman for somebody. So it's, it's regular, so it's not getting a -1 to hit penalties, but it's only a one-man team, so it costs a lot less. Even if it's just that one-man marksman, I mean, that guy has made double his points back just by removing you. So he's already done his job. So in my mind, it's like, technically they would still, like, they have a use, they have a purpose. I'm not saying that they aren't good for this, especially because, again, they do get infiltrators. So for central objectives, they can be really nice for putting down on things. I'm not told that it's the best sort of thing for you to use for objective holding, mostly because of the investment. In terms of objective taking, well, it depends. Airstrikes can pin down objective holders, which is really nice. Help to protect your men on approach, because at the very least, they will get a -1 to hit when shooting at people, which is great. If you cause them to go down, that's even better, because then you know that they won't be able to shoot at you as you're coming up. If they were defending a piece of area terrain, and so you were worried about going in on an assault against them, if you can make them go down against the fighter plane, then they don't get the benefit of defending a position, so now you guys are attacking simultaneously instead of them getting to fight first. That's advantageous. And so there are some benefits to this. It is great for supporting troops, of course, for the exact same reasons it's good for defending your own, because if you can at least pin down things That will help to keep your men safe. The thing to keep in mind, though, of course, is that what happens if the plane doesn't arrive when you want it to, right? Because if the plane just continues lingering, you don't necessarily want to move your men within 12 inches because they might either be within range of the token, so they'll be getting pins from your own plane, or they could become the new target of the plane. So you got to be careful about all that. It can slow down your advance. You might be like, okay, well, I don't want to go in quite yet. I don't go in quite yet because you're all waiting for the plane to drop. So just be careful of that, okay? And I guess the question that I tend to think about when it comes to objective taking is it better to take this unit over and against a comparable points value in artillery, armored vehicles, or even more than one, right? Like, can I put more suppressive fire down on an objective by taking 2 light auto cannons or 1 Humber armored car or 2 machine gun teams or 2 mortar teams? In the case of light mortars, 3 mortar teams for the same cost as 1 air observer. And I tend to lean toward, I think I can get more value, more reliably out of it, if for no other reason than they're firing more than once. And even with the Americans, firing more than twice. So what would you prioritize? Well, as you can see from the chart, light to medium armored vehicles, those DV7 to 9s are really great. Large infantry squads, because of the fact you want to take advantage of the volume of hits and the area of effect of those hits, those are also really good. Arguably maybe better because you might be able to chip away a little more value instead of the all or nothing against a vehicle. If you have targets that are near soft skin transports or tows, that's really great. Removing the actual transport can be really dangerous. And also, of course, targeting it can be dangerous because of how fast it can move, right? So just be aware of that. And then if you really don't have anything better, you can do a DV10 or DV11 heavily armored vehicle. Just know that you're probably mostly doing it for pins. You're not actually likely to do any serious damage to it. You're not probably going to remove it. If you do, that's great. And do sound off down in the comments below because it's always fun to hear those stories. But in general, plan on it just being pin generation. That's what it's there for. But personally, if I wanted to pin heavily armored vehicles, I would target a unit that's going to be roughly within 18 inches of that armored vehicle, and I would drop the token near that armored vehicle. Because then I do D3 pins. There isn't even a rule that says if they're a veteran and they wouldn't be able to be damaged by the attack aircraft, they don't suffer any. It just says roll for every unit within 6 inches of the center of that token, and they get D3 pins. So even if you had a strafing fighter, you could do D3 pins to a DV11 veteran Tiger II, as long as they're within 6 inches of the template's center, as opposed to the target unit of the attack. Won't do any damage to it, but if the goal is just to pin, put the token near the Tiger, as opposed to putting down the target unit as the Tiger, if that makes sense. So what changes would I recommend? I am recommending that we take it completely back to formula. I hate saying that. I generally do not do that when it comes to game systems. I don't like rewriting the entirety of a rule. The problem that I have is the fact that it's way too big. There are way too many swingy factors. There are way too many things you can't plan on. And that's going to encourage a lot of people to, one, just get bogged down in text. And two, it's going to encourage people not to take it, which means people won't see it as often, which means when it does come up, people get bogged down in it. Okay. And so in order to help it out, there's a couple changes I would make. First and foremost, we're not going to roll for the plane anymore. Okay. When you're buying your observer, slightly cheaper, minus 10 points if you're taking a strafing fighter, plus 20 points for a ground attack aircraft. Normal standard cost if you're taking a fighter bomber. Okay? You choose which plane you're calling in, and I'm recommending this for 2 reasons. Number 1, because again, it makes things more reliable. Okay? Second, it saves us time. Third, technically speaking, this is more philosophically. When you look at it historically, bombers and ground attack aircraft were not under the control of fighter command. Generally speaking, the overwhelming number of people who had air forces that were deploying, heavy ground attack aircraft, large scale bombers, things like that, they had fighter command and they had bomber command. And bomber command was not on the same channel because generally speaking, these things were not something you could just call in from somewhere across the battlefield. These things were pre-planned on pre-existing targets. They were not looking for targets of opportunity, mostly because these things were so dang expensive that you didn't want them just getting shot down casually. So you saved them, you reserved them for strategic attacks, okay? And so because of that, the fact that we get access to things like flying fortresses and ground attack aircraft tells us that we're already crossing over between 2 different kinds of command for the overwhelming number of forces that were involved in the war, which means, in my mind, You shouldn't be able to casually call one in with an air observer. Make it a fighter observer, a fighter bomber observer, or a ground attack aircraft observer. It's the closest we can get to this, and it helps to solve us the problem of yet another chart, resolving yet another random rule. The second thing that I do is I would simplify the order of operations, okay? We're going to remove a lot of the stepping back, stepping forward, doubling back sort of stuff because we want to make this relatively easy while still holding on to most of the stuff that works out. But in general, one of the biggest things we're going to change going into this is there isn't going to be any inter-turn reaction stuff. Everything that's going to happen is going to happen during the turn. And the reason for that is that it makes it so that things continue to move smoothly, okay? The third thing we're going to do is we're going to remove rookie pilot. It is frankly not necessary, especially with the newest change, okay? But I mean, one, it is a cool mechanic, just to be clear, but it is another way to gimp the air observer. And I don't really like that because it makes it just so swingy that it makes it so people don't want to play with it. Two, it adds yet another step that people need to resolve, and I don't like that. Okay, and I just think Rookie Pilot adds more problems than it should include. I think in narrative play, Rookie Pilot would be perfectly fine as a scenario rule. And you just throw it in like how we normally do right now, right? But in my variant version of this, as you'll soon see, because I'm just going to read it aloud in its entirety so you can see it, because there's only 4 paragraphs. It's very short. It's very easy to resolve this. It's simple. Either it doesn't come in 3 down, or it does come in 4+. Easy, right? It's a quick roll, and it's using the same kind of hit modifier that we're generally using elsewhere for other units. People already used the idea of 4+ to hit, right? And now Air Observer is going to start with 4+ to hit. 3 down doesn't hit, right? And we're going to continue going on like that. So in my mind, my recommended change, it's going to simplify an awful lot. It's going to follow a lot of other rules that are present elsewhere in the game, and it's going to help to keep the action moving. And so in order to help out with this, I'm actually going to set a timer for myself. And I'm going to read aloud for you in its entirety, because it's not very long. It's only 4 paragraphs, and one of them is really short. The entirety of the special rule for air observers. Are you ready? Here we go. Friendly units using indirect fire special rule can draw a line of sight from your forward observers. In addition, once per game, when the forward observer unit receives a fire order, not from ambush, the observer can call an aircraft to attack the enemy. Nominate an enemy unit anywhere within sight of the observer as the target for the airstrike. On the following turn, when the air observer is assigned an order, roll a d6. On a 4+, the strike comes in. On a 3 or lower, the plane has not arrived yet. Roll again on the following turn. Before the aircraft attacks, resolve shooting from flak units. If either side has any flak units that have not already activated, are within range, and the target unit of the strike is within the flak unit's arc of fire, they are issued an order dice set to the fire order. Resolve an attack with the flak weapons. If the aircraft would be destroyed, damage value 6+, it is driven off and the airstrike is over. Friendly flak units may test to hold their fire against attacking aircraft if they are in arc and range of the marked position. Roll a d6 for each flak unit. To successfully hold their fire, inexperienced units must roll a 4+, regular units a 3+, and veteran units a 2+. Units that do not manage to hold their fire will shoot at the incoming aircraft as if it were an enemy. Note that if a flak unit is one of the units that would be struck by the airstrike, the test is automatically failed. All unactivated flak units within the radius fire automatically. If the warplane is not stopped by the flak, the target unit and every unit from either side within 6 inches of the target suffers D3 pins from the attack. Then resolve the weapon attack against the unit for the aircraft. 1 minute, 32 seconds. That is how long it takes, admittedly reading at a centaur speed, which is fair, to read through the entirety of the thing. And that covered everything. It covered can draw line of sight for your indirect fire units. That covered how you call it in. It discussed the entirety of the flak rules. It discussed how you hold back your flak as well as how you resolve the attack. 1 minute and 32 seconds. It's dramatically shorter. So now I'm going to spend about 4 minutes walking through it a little more to make sure that we understand the nuances and the difference. So obviously, as regards indirect fire special rules, it's going to remain the same. Nothing has changed for that. Okay. Still drawing for the entire unit. So if you do have a grenadier squad with the light mortars, I guess it draws for all 3, even if they're firing at different units. That's just currently the way it works, and I didn't feel like fixing it here. I figure an errata will take care of that at some point in the future if it becomes necessary. Okay, you're going to still nominate a unit that's within your line of sight as the target of the strike, and then you're going to have 4+ hit. 3 down continues to circle. We haven't arrived yet. Okay, nice and simple. And then before things happen, okay, and notice that this is on the following turn when the air observer is assigned an order, so it's not at the start of the turn. And it's not when you assign the air observer a second fire order. You could assign a down order to the air observer, and you could make that the very first thing that comes in for the turn. You could make it the last thing that comes in for the turn when all of the flak units have already activated. It means there's a lot of chance that people can shoot you, right? And if you are not issued an order, the strike does not come in because you aren't rolling a d6. So this means you won't have the time bomb has already been passed. The stick of dynamite has already been lit. We're just waiting to see who's holding it when it goes off thing. It means there is now a second way to counter the air observer. You can remove the order dice. And if you remove the order dice, admittedly in its entirety, so maybe now there's a reason to take snipers again, question mark, then you won't ever get a chance to proc rolling for when the strike comes in. They're calling in for that final check to make sure they're confirming the coordinates, and nobody answers on the radio. Somebody else is calling for them. They go off and do something else. So this provides us with a certain level of extra defense against how they use observers, but it also makes observers a lot more useful against flak units because you could choose to activate them when the flak units have already taken their turn. And as long as that flak unit has not been assigned an ambush order, it should be the only time they would be allowed to do it because that would allow you to then set them to a fire order. Flak unit will not actually be using its flak ability. Okay, it's a unit. It's a rule you're paying for to have the option for it, but now there's strategy involved in it. It isn't a beer and pretzels part of the game anymore. Okay, then what happens is before the aircraft actually attacks the target unit, okay, we're going to resolve the flak units. This is not free anymore. The flak unit has to decide for the turn I am shooting at the airplane, or I am not shooting at the airplane. Right, and it's possible again going back into it. Some flak units, even from your own side, may end up shooting at it, but we're also measuring distance and arc. They have to be within the range of the unit. They have to be within the arc of the unit. Why are we doing this? Number one, it means that a 36-inch range machine gun can't fire at the other side of the board. The second reason why we're doing this, and very important, is that it resolves exactly like everything else we resolve in the game. Right? It's the exact same setup, the exact same format. I want to shoot with this unit. I measure range. I measure arc to make sure everything is correct, right? So we're maintaining stuff that's present from everything else, okay? We're getting rid of the whole how many hits are being done and it's resolved like buildings if it's HE or anything else like that. We simply say this. Planes had a damage value of 6+. Why did we choose 6+? One, because it means a pintle-mounted machine gun, medium machine gun with no penetration modifier can still do things, which is important. But the second and other important rule is airplanes were not heavily armored. They were very thin, mostly because it had to fly. And they needed to be able to get it up there and maintain a pretty good amount of speed. And that meant they needed to reduce the weight. And the goal was just not to be hit. That was the plan. And so now units get to fire at the plane. Well, how do we resolve the firing? Well, it's simple. Starts at a 4+ to hit. Did you have any pins on you? Do you have any other negative modifiers, like maybe a -1 to hit because you're a team weapon or something else like that, and you're down to one guy? You roll to hit, just like normal. You roll to wound, just like normal. No other weird special rules that are adding text and adding other requirements and provisos. It's resolved exactly like how they've been resolving other shots, okay? And if they would be destroyed by this, then it's driven off, the airstrike is over. But if not, and of course, you get the whole discussion. The whole third paragraph is just, again, how you can hold your own stuff. But if it isn't driven off by the flak, then the target unit and every unit from either side within 6 inches of the target unit suffers D3 pins. There's no separate token 18 inches away. It's just, here's the unit. And then all of the units within 6 inches of that are going to suffer the D3 pins because they can hear stuff going off. They can see things exploding really close to them. All of them are receiving pins, and then the target unit is resolved with the attack of the weapon on the aircraft. And of course, we don't have to roll to see what the weapon is on the aircraft because we bought the aircraft. Okay? And that's the entirety of the rule. If you're playing Americans, you get a chance at a second one. The way I would errata the Soviet Union Army special rules, by the way, as regards this, is that I would simply make it so that they're flying fortress instead of requiring the whole 5 hits to drive off instead of 3, because of course that's one of the big changes that comes with this. I mean, call me crazy, looking at least at the armor values, at the thickness on the armor, that I would just say it counts as damage value 7, which on its own is arguably maybe even a better upgrade, because it means people who invested in really, really cheapo pintle mounts on transports are doing nothing unless they decided to go the American route and go for pintle-mounted heavy machine guns. And I think that would be pretty advantageous. for this ground attack aircraft when it comes through. But what do you think? Do you like air observers? Do you think that it's a really good and beautiful, elegant system? Am I being too harsh on how long it takes to resolve it, how many steps it takes, how many times sometimes it doubles back on itself in order to then resolve your stuff in it? I'm sure people have thoughts. Having tested out this version, I'll tell you now, it is a lot faster. It is a lot smoother. And I've only introduced it to one new player, but they understood it. Because again, they just did what they were normally doing with things. So in my mind, I'm biased, but I tend to like this format. Let me know what you think down below, and I will see you next time.